Égalité, actualité.
Hello and welcome to The World This Week with me, Gavin Lee. Everything's changed in Syria with the sudden fall of a brutal regime. This week, the House of Assad has crumbled, a repressive rule of father, then son for over 5 decades. The Islamist rebels of a week ago are now promising to be a salvation government. We discussed the fears and hopes for a nation as a new chapter begins.
Currently, we are in the 3-month interim phase before forming a new government. These are the steps we are working on. It is still too early to talk about the details of how that government will be formed.
France got another new Prime Minister, the 4th announced this year after Borne, Attal and then Barnier were given the boot. President Macron has opted for a centrist ally, François Bayrou, to lead a minority government. Reports suggest it followed a tense meeting when Monsieur Bayrou was informed he hadn't got the job. But by the time the meeting was over, he had convinced the president to hire him anyway. So, can he satisfy the left, the right and all that's in between, or at least be the domino that takes a little more time to fall? Operation Keep Calm and Limp On carries on. Fresh elections can't be called until the summer. So, could he be the horse to back that can get there? All bets are off.
I simply want to say that I have 2 obsessions. The first one, which for me is one of the major risks, is the glass wall that has been built between citizens and those in power.
And it's been a week that's seen Donald Trump declared as Time magazine's Person of the Year 2024. The person seemed to have most shaped the world and the headlines for better or worse over the past 12 months. Well, in that time, Donald Trump's been a convicted felon, an assassination survivor and now president-elect. Time editors argue no single individual has played a larger role in changing the course of politics and history than Trump. Quote, an agent and beneficiary of the resurgence of populism. It was a one-horse race, they say.
In the history of the magazine, Time has nearly always named the person who wins the presidential election Person of the Year. But in this case, it was quite obviously the only choice.
Welcome to the programme. Alongside me on the panel this week in Istanbul, we have Oliver McTurnan, the co-founder and director of Forward Thinking, a conflict resolution organisation that is trying to promote peace in the Middle East. Oliver was involved daily in negotiations that led to the release of the Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit in 2011, and in the course of the conflict in Gaza has spoken over the months to contacts both with Hamas and Israeli officials. Great to have you with us this evening, Oliver. And tell us about your week, as you've watched these momentous events in Syria unfold.
Thank you. Well, like everyone else, I think I've watched with a longing for a peaceful development.
What I'm interested as well, Oliver, the current circumstances in the Middle East, and you've kept an eye on what's going on in Gaza. Do you think a peace deal, a hostage release, is any closer or further away since you were last on the programme several months ago?
Well, I think the issues remain the same, that Hamas, I believe, I understand, are committing themselves to what was agreed way back in July. Whether or not Prime Minister Netanyahu is prepared to change his stance, I still think remains to be seen. In some way, it's in his interests, personal interests, to continue the war as it is. Hopefully, I'm wrong.
Great to have you with us this evening. With me in the studio, Ana Navarro Pedro, seasoned Portuguese broadcaster, polyglot journalist based here with us in Paris. Great to see you this evening.
Great to be back.
I want to mention a note to you because it's easy to forget now, but at the start of this weekend, the reopening of Notre Dame, we saw Notre Dame diplomacy too. What do you make of all that?
You know, I hadn't spoken with a friend for a week, and then I called him on Thursday, and I said, well, I haven't spoken for a week, and the world has changed since. Notre Dame, actually, it was maybe the most positive event of the week in regarding France. And then the fall of Assad House was quite something to see, to watch.
Yeah, it's seismic. It's not just the world this week. One of the issues, the biggest tumultuous events in the world this year. Well, also with us, Lila Jacinto, senior editor at France 24. Lila, hello.
Nice to be here.
I want to talk about something that you've been following this week, the Bibi files. You've been reviewing for France 24. Tell us about that.
Well, the Bibi Files is a documentary on the Netanyahu's corruption case. And of course, this week, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, actually took the stand for the first time in these corruption cases. And the Bibi Files is a documentary that has never seen before footage of the police interrogations on these corruption cases. But more interestingly, actually, this documentary connects the dots between the corruption case and the pieces of Middle East policy. You know, how did Netanyahu get into the arms of extreme right politicians, and why, as Oliver said, he sees himself in a political existential threat that sees Israel in a state of constant war, constantly against the enemies. So it really connects the dots between what most people think is just a corruption trial, but has a much, much larger picture.
And it's airing this week at the Toronto Film Festival. Let's take a look at the trailer.
That was in the summer.
In the summer?
Yes.
OK. Well, we're going to talk about it for relevant reasons in a moment, but let's just take a look at the documentary. You can find it. If not, you can tease us a little bit more, because I should say, within this documentary, both Netanyahu, Sarah and Benjamin Netanyahu, deny any allegations, and quite forthright as well with it. I think Yair, their son, is also involved. Let's take a look at the trailer.
Netanyahu is the architect of chaos.
He survived in a state of war. He survived in a state of instability.
It's not a cover-up. He tried to kill the system. Nobody is above the law.
זוכרים את השורה הזאת מהסנדק? Keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer.
I mentioned the timeliness of this because actually the filmmakers would like this to be shown in Israel, but that seems unlikely, doesn't it?
Yes, because Israeli law does not allow this footage to be aired without the consent of the people who have been recorded. So these are police recordings, so this was leaked to the filmmakers. So Israelis probably won't be able to see it, but people outside Israel will.
Great. Lila, great to have you on the programme with us too. We begin Sunday, the 8th of December. It was 4 o'clock in the morning when the rebel forces in Syria updated their social media accounts. Damascus liberated. President Assad gone. The house of Assad, father Hafez, son Bashar, who dominated, dictated and brutally subjugated the nation for 53 years. The regime fell in the blink of an eye, and a 13-year civil war ended with an 11-day lightning advance. Among the first videos to go viral were scenes inside Sednaya prison, 12 kilometers north of Damascus.
كبروا 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 يا الله ليك الولد يا حرام ليك الولد يا حرام منين عمي.
Well, these were Syrians releasing prisoners from a site known as the slaughterhouse, where political opponents of Assad were tortured, where many disappeared. And Channel 4 News' Padraig O'Brien was among those to see evidence of what had happened there. Well, another moment caught on camera was the ability for ordinary Syrians to see how the Assads had been living and to take some of it themselves. What they said was righting a wrong in their eyes. Rapidly vacated Muhajirin presidential palace home to the Assads had crowds of Syrians inside the building.
there is the paraphernalia of torture everywhere. We've seen nooses. It is a horrific sight. The place is charged with grief and panic and chaos. They're trying to get to some of the cells which have sealed doors. In order to do that, they're trying to break through some of the walls.
And then a ledger found on the ground. People come running from everywhere looking for names. The administration of horror.
So this is a register of prisoners, is it?
This is a register of prisoners. This is the name of the guys. Okay, and there is another one for ladies and her children. This one has been all dead.
Everybody here is dead?
Yeah, they were executed.
Sorry, is this a book of executions?
Yes.
So Channel 4 inside the prison with Barack O'Brien. I mentioned a moment ago the scenes from inside the presidential palace. Let's also take a look at those.
ما في ضوء
بس لا يكسروا هيك
حرام والله
هذا مال الشعب والله مال الشعب والله مال الشعب
and will be granted asylum there. And meanwhile, in the vacuum, Israel has been carrying out airstrikes on Syrian military installations. Western governments have been working out what to do with the group that led the charge that brought down the dictator HTS, which remains labelled as terrorist due to its links with al-Qaeda, and the leader, Abu Mohammed al-Jilani, with a $10 million bounty on his head, has dropped his nom de guerre associated with his jihadist past. He's been using his real name, Ahmed al-Sharar, calling his group the Salvation Government. Well, let's begin and let's go to Aleppo, where we can bring in our correspondent, Andrew Hillier. Andrew, talk to us about your week.
Well, Gavin, I'm going to set the scene for you tonight here in Syria by telling you what our team saw today in Aleppo. And we spent most of the day on Aleppo's central square, Saadallah al-Jabiri, and there was throughout the day a celebration. That's because today, Friday, is the first Friday since the fall of the Bashar al-Assad regime. So after Friday prayers, people spilled out into the streets, many of them heading to that central square. There were families, former inmates, people who had lost their loved ones during the civil war and under the Assad regime. Syria's white helmets were there too, of course. They played a key role throughout Syria's civil war, coming to the help and to the aid of those thousands upon thousands of people who were wounded and injured. And I want you now just to listen to two people who spoke to us, a woman who lost her child and a former inmate of a regime prison. Take a listen.
I'm so happy because the revolution triumphed, even if we paid for it with our blood, a lot of blood, and the screams of mothers, the pain of children who were orphaned and women who became widows. Bashar al-Assad created chaos in Syria. He created chaos. I hope God burns his heart like he burnt the heart of so many mothers.
I am in a state of euphoria. I swear, as soon as I arrived in the square, I started crying. I cried because I feel freedom. I saw policemen and I stopped and I took a photo with them. They embraced me. I can't believe it. Is it a dream? Is it really happening? Is all this normal?
And I think what's interesting about at least today is that, you know, people, at least today, aren't asking too many questions about the future. This is their celebration, and they want to make the most of the euphoria while it lasts, because there are some very difficult questions indeed that do lie ahead.
That's really interesting. This bubble of euphoria. We both experienced this before. Go back to Libya a few years ago, where there was this expectation of something to happen, and then, well, Western governments, you know, Libyans say, weren't there to pick up the pieces. Andrew, stay with us, because I want to bring you into the conversation as well. I want to go first to Istanbul and Oliver. These jaw-dropping developments this week. Tell me your thoughts.
Well, I think the first lesson for all is that a stability based on oppression is not sustainable. You know, I remember going to Damascus 20 years ago, and you could walk back to your hotel at 3 o'clock in the morning feeling very safe because of the security grip that the Assad regime had on the people. But as we see now, thankfully, that is not real security. It's not real or sustainable forever because it is bound to erupt. So I think that's the first lesson. The second thing is, of course, one lives with the hope that the people have suffered so much that they will be able to work with each other to find the way through the transition and hopefully find a way to establish a government that's inclusive of all the different traditions, cultural, religious traditions, ethnic traditions that are part of Syria today. That would be my hope.
An inclusive government. Oliver, just Leila, listening to Oliver, and I'm also minded about something that Lindsay Hilsum said recently. She was on the programme not too long ago. She's in Damascus now. She said she was speaking with the deputy new industry and agriculture governor just in post for the last few days, part of HTS. And he said to her at the end of the interview, how do we get Western governments on side? What should we do? And she scratched her head and said, well, women's rights are important. How about talking about democracy? And that's the state of kind of the embryonic sense of where do we go from here? They call themselves a salvation government. You've been watching closely. Could it be?
Well, I mean, in 2024, we have seen all the lessons that happened after Saddam's fall in Iraq, after Gaddafi's fall in Libya. But I don't want to be a Debbie Downer on a week that such a momentous occasion happened. I mean, I cannot but hope that, that the Syrian people managed to get some level of democracy, of just not being able to live under the yoke of this brutality. Look, HTS is what in the West is called, and I've been studying this phenomenon since the 1990s, right? I mean, we use this term jihadist groups and jihadis. You know, how much of it is really circumstantial? You know, where a person is born, how a person is brought up, what is the political situation? I mean, and the rebel leader, Jolani, really encapsulates a history of the Middle East. You know, he began in Iraq. He was with Al-Qaeda. He was with ISIS. He's now having a very pragmatic approach. He's making all the right noises. Do we trust him? You know, is there really an understanding of what is pluralism in an Islamist framework? But so, you know, we only have to hope this works out. The signs don't look good, of course, because, I mean, you know, Syria's fate is not just up to Syrians. That's the problem. But I feel that with Jolani, I am seeing something, and I've been covering Islamist groups for a very long time. I'm seeing something very interesting. Who knows? Maybe the Islamists have learned their lesson as well.
It is interesting that you point out his past because he's somebody that the Americans, security services have quoted him welcoming in the past, the 9/11 attacks. He's been part of Al-Qaeda, and to quote LP Hartley, he would say, well, the past is a foreign country. They did things differently. Now this is a different situation. We're not calling for a caliphate or jihadist motives. We want to be an inclusive government. So here's the thing for Western governments, Anna. How do you think they should deal with HTS right now?
First question first. Were some Western governments totally absent from this glorious and triumphant seizure of Damascus by HTS? The question is really on the table. Maybe we'll start having answers very soon. But I don't think that he just started, al-Jolani just started off, and the Western capitals were just watching and saying, yes, please, go ahead. You know, no, of course, there were other influences. And I must say that I was rather thoughtful when you said that he epitomizes what has been happening in the Middle East since which now is being called, West Asia by Asians themselves, in the last 30 or 40 years. And it is true to a certain point, but may I ask you, may I counter, not everybody went into jihad, not everybody decapitated and cut heads, not everybody took arms and killed civilians and committed terrorist acts. So he's just part of it, but not all of it. And the problem is, can he be something else now? I mean, can he be so opportunistic? And it would be a good thing in this sense that he can really change. I'm totally with you, we must savor the present moment, but we must not forget that the seeds for the chaos are in here. Chaos and deception are in here.
It's savouring the present moment. Andrew, in Aleppo, it's interesting, isn't it? Because that is the line that Al-Jilani has said today. Go out today, be joyous. This is Victory Friday. I'm just interested, having seen all of the images, the footage, the reports we've heard from you as well, of people who've been released from prisons, the suffering that we've seen, that line between vengeance that people want to seek, those you're talking to, and the difference, well, the trust within this interim government that people say, OK, this is in good hands right now. What are people saying to you?
Well, I think it's a very good question because, you know, on the one hand, we've spoken to a lot of people who have told us, let's give these people a chance. Again, a lot of what people say, of course, you have to take it with a lot of caution because, of course, people are still in this feeling of euphoria, of course, that's come after the fall of the Bashar al-Assad regime. I mean, I'm not sure you can hear around me, but I can still hear car horns honking and people cheering. So people, I think, want to believe that this will work out for the best. The question of minority groups is very important too. We heard one story, for example, of a man who, when Hayat Tahrir al-Sham swept through the city of Aleppo, a Christian man, he immediately ran to hide the bottles of alcohol that he was selling in his storefront because he wasn't sure how fighters from Hayat Tahrir al-Sham would react. So there is this fine line between, I think, people want to trust in their new rulers, if you like, on the one hand, because they want to believe in a better future. But of course, on the other hand, there's the fact that, a lot of these people have ideas about a system of government that is at odds with the way minority groups see things. So, we're getting lots of different opinions, and I think people really, that's one of the reasons they're making the most of this euphoric moment, because they know that the future is going to be difficult, and there are going to be many difficult questions that lie ahead.
There are, and as Andrew was saying, Oliver, the day after the euphoria, what's your thought, Oliver, about the chances for peace? What's being offered out there? And as I said, suggested to Anna as well, the responses from international governments and how that's playing out right now. What's your take on that?
Well, I think we have to take the leadership at its word, and we have to trust them until they prove otherwise. One of the things in my experience is that people very often join jihadist groups or other groups because it's the only way they see to address the oppression and injustices. They're not necessarily locked to a ideological worldview and that they're trying to establish a new world order. No, they're trying to address the immediate grievance in their situation. And I think that may well be true of a lot of the groups in Syria. And I think now is the time for us to recognize that it's a place where our interests and our principles coincide. We've got to act according to our principles, what we say we uphold, in order to guarantee the interests of the region and our own global interests as well.
And if we look at some of those global interests that Oliver was talking about, let's mention President Putin. What about President Assad right now? A number of ex-dictators who are reportedly living in this Moscow suburb of Bovika. What use is he, do you think, to the Russian government?
There are some reports coming out mentioning that the Moscow knew what was going to happen. They do have some good spying networks, obviously. And along with Iran, they decided not to save Assad's head this time, not to save his regime this time. They think it's time to move on to something else, that it was a trap for them. They are busy, Russia with Ukraine. So sorry, I don't know what I'm doing to your mics tonight. And Iran is fearing opening a front with Israel, which, by the way, Netanyahu and some of his ministers are saying maybe it's the time now to go bomb the nuclear sites in Iran before Trump takes a seat. So that's another perspective, that the very, very dire perspective we have there. But I think Russia really let him go this time. And I don't know what is going to be their reaction regarding Latakia, their military naval base in Latakia. That is, but let's not forget that Netanyahu and Putin are good colleagues, good friends from the past, and that they have each other's phone number, and maybe things can be arranged between them.
Let me tell you what amused me. When things go, when occupiers, when it doesn't work, it's very interesting to hear how the local players are blamed. So when the US pulled out of Afghanistan, the Afghans never got their act together, and so now this time it was just interesting to hear Moscow saying, Assad never listened to us. But their base in Tartus is of primary importance. And I wouldn't say that if you're looking at it in this dichotomy of winners and losers, yes, obviously Iran and Russia lost. But Russia is talking to HTS. Moscow displayed to the world that it still looks after its people. It took Assad into safety. Maybe Assad could be a card because what's Russia's interest is that base in Tartus, through which it extends its influence into the Eastern Mediterranean and Africa. And I think Putin is a pretty adept player.
Yeah, he's going to have to prove versatile. And meanwhile, as Anna just pointed out, you have the Israelis rapidly repositioning. They've been expanding the occupied territory on the Golan Heights. They've been taking out, something like 300 or more airstrikes, taking out aircraft, air defense, radar, military installations. And at the same time, you have Benjamin Netanyahu, who's been in court this week facing a criminal investigation.
Yes, on the one hand, there is also a tendency to blame all the problems that Israel has unleashed in the Middle East. Israel does not seem to understand what territorial sovereignty of its neighbors even means. So there is a tendency to put a lot of focus on Netanyahu and saying that this is an administration at fault. No, this is the state of Israel's policy.
But their defense point is that if this gets into the hands of a group we cannot trust, and they are jihadists, we are taking out these sites before they become a danger.
Very important point. Because if we are talking about an international order, for instance, there are rules and norms. Assad has chemical weapons, for instance. We have a UN organization that is tasked with this, has been working on Syria. How then can we have Israel just bomb sites? We have no idea, are they bombing chemical weapons? So on the one hand, are we committed as the West? Are we committed to international norms? Or are we just going to say, right, we completely understand that Israel has to take advantage of this transition, but we need to put in place the structures. And Israel, of course, has a nuclear bomb, which we never talk about, but we know every degree of uranium enrichment of Iran, right? So where do we stand? And there seems like a sort of implicit understanding that yes, of course, Israel has to look after its interests and make use of this transition period to break an international convention that they signed that brought an end to the 1974 war. So, if you ask me, what's the biggest threat to Syria? Yes, it's a domestic threat of having Islamists trying to work with others. There are the Kurds, etc. But the external factors are an even bigger threat.
Mm-hmm. And there's another thing, like last week, Friday, I had some information from Brazil, which is one of the countries of the BRICS. Remember, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa make this conglomerate of countries that are challenging Western hegemony in the world. And Brazilian analysts were saying, no, Russia and Iran will not intervene for Assad. That's decided, and this was before Sunday. And they were saying as well, let's see now how the Western countries are going to deal with Israel in this new situation. And of course, the rest of the world is watching and is seeing us, saying, well, Israel has the right to grab 230 kilometers of Syrian land and occupy it and annex it. And Russia, we have to use nuclear wars to take them out of Ukraine, and they are watching it. And the turn of the history, the wheel of history is turning, and it's not turning in the favor of the West. And no one, apparently in our leadership, is paying attention to that fact. It's really upsetting.
Andrew, in Aleppo, I mentioned earlier, and Leila mentioned it as well, other comparisons. We talk about the fall of Hussein in Iraq, Saddam Hussein in Libya as well. When Gaddafi fell, go back to August 2011, I remember being in Benghazi, talking to the Libyans who were doing the same thing we're seeing now, shooting up in the air. And the promises that they heard from Prime Minister David Cameron at the time, from the US as well, President Obama. And there were people coming there, setting up radio stations, businesses, and it didn't last. I just wonder to the degree that you're hearing from HTS and people you're speaking to, that sense of lessons learned, the awareness that this has happened before and there's been a similar pattern.
I think there is definitely this desire, of course, to tell people that they have learned from the past. At least that's what they're saying. They say they've learned lessons from the past. They say they're not going to repeat the same errors from the past. But I think the reality is we do not know how this is going to pan out. The only thing we do know is that after that lightning offensive, we have seen stability return to large parts of Syria. That's not the case everywhere. There still is fighting in northeastern Syria. But stability nonetheless. There are still massive humanitarian needs, more than 1 million people displaced by the recent fighting. And there is a massive amount of work to be done. Now, as to whether or not they have learned the lessons from the past, well, look, Aleppo is an interesting case, isn't it? It's one of the cities that suffered the most during the darkest days of Syria's civil war. And the reason I say it could be a testing ground is that, it was the very first city to fall to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the first major city during that lightning offensive. And what happened was that the Salvation Government, of course, that government that was set up by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in Idlib, once the Assad regime had been chased from Aleppo, they were the ones who stepped in quickly to restore public services. There are also many minority groups here. So, of course, how they fare here in Aleppo will be very interesting indeed, very significant, because that may very well give us clues as to how things will unfold across the rest of Syria. And also it may answer the question as to whether or not Hayat Tahrir al-Sham have learned the lessons of past mistakes.
Andrew, thank you. We'll come to you. We'll follow events there and we'll come to you throughout the weekend. But for tonight, thank you so much. Andrew Hillier in Aleppo. Well, here in France, Friday morning, the Élysée Palace, another new Prime Minister announcement. After a week of consultations with President Macron meeting the left, the right, but not the far right, and brooding on what sticking plaster solution would be acceptable in the complex post-election political equation that is. Well, with no overall majority, a three-way split between a leftist alliance, centrists and the far-right National Rally. His pick last time, Michel Barnier, lasted 3 months before being ousted by a no-confidence vote, trying to push through a budget without allowing Parliament a vote on it. The French public want, quote, a bit of enthusiasm, momentum, fresh winds, something new, said the Green leader, Marine Tondelier. President Macron cut short a trip to Poland to make the announcement on Friday. So let's see who it was going to be.
Dans un moment aussi grave pour le pays, pour l'Europe.
In such a serious moment for our country and for Europe, and considering the risks our planet is facing, we have a duty to confront with open eyes, without hesitation, the situation which we have inherited and has built up over decades. A situation we have not yet considered urgent. The search for balance, without which we struggle to live. Let's just say that the last few years, the accumulation of crises has been such that the explanations to our situations are understandable.
So the centrist François Bayrou, Anna, enthusiasm, momentum, a different choice. What do you think?
Definitive euphoria in France. Actually, I think it was only the media who were very euphoric about this piece of news. The rest of the country is quite aloof regarding the decisions in Paris. Yeah, François Bayrou, interesting choice. Very old politician in France, very experienced, quite a character, strong character. He is from, not from the far center, but from the center itself. Which means that maybe he has a possibility of trying to unite left and right and far left around some project that will stand for a few months. So let's be hopeful as well for France. But let's see the seeds, in reality, the seeds of the coming chaos or the coming deception in this country. You know, actually it's very interesting, his nomination, as you said before. You said he's going to keep calm and limp ahead. And you also said he was not Macron's choice, and he forced Macron to choose him. Now, we don't know if there was some arm ringing, if it was some blackmail, whatever, it worked. But it was the first time Macron was forced to bend the knee during these 7 years of power. And that is an interesting thing. Now, he's not a good loser, Macron. So he's going to do pull some trick on François Bayrou. You may be sure of that. Now, that aside, let's hope now that he can be seen by the French as the person who wants to reconcile. That's what the word he said, reconciliation. And this country is divided as never before. In these 7 years, many things have happened, of course, distrust in politics in general. Populism is on the rise, both on the left and on the right. And I'm doing it with the wrong arm, thank you. Yeah. But I mean, they also have at the head of the country a President, Emmanuel Macron, who is indeed a very intelligent person, but who is a very, very, very divisive person as well. And those divisions are set in this country. People are at odds with each other. And there is a situation of real tension in France. So his first task, he said, is reconciliation. Let's see if he can do it.
Leila, he is a heavyweight, as Anna just suggested. Some people call him the father of the centrist movement. He was key to Emmanuel Macron having the job as president, and because he gave him his support. So he's been justice minister, he's been education minister back in the 90s under Mitterrand, and then under Chirac after that. And he's clearly somebody who's putting his weight across. I spoke to one centrist, I won't say who it was, a member of the same party, who said, I think it should have been somebody on the left, a socialist, because this is kind of a similar situation to Michel Barnier. And yet, he thinks he can do it. He says the priority is still getting the debt down. Do you think he'll have a honeymoon period?
I don't share any optimism on this at all. Talking about change, roll out the 73-year-old who's been around forever, saying the same thing, talking about the deficit before everybody else did, and now he will talk about the deficit. I don't really see how, these divisions are going to be bridged by him. I'm absolutely sure he thinks he can do it, but that's the hubris of French politicians right now. I mean, I mean, and another thing that amused me about this circus of French politics that has played out over the past 24 hours, the optics were just fantastic, actually, and they were so telling. Our journalist colleagues freezing out in the cold on Thursday night, waiting for this announcement to come out. People asking for change, and who did and the message. The name is not brought out by Macron on Thursday, so we hang on until Friday. And who do we get? The top name that everybody said would probably be the Prime Minister. Squarely from the centrists, absolutely no reach out to the left. Macron since the snap election happened, which he unleashed, and every time a prime minister fell, he lectured the French people about why this is not working, no responsibility taken, and he's fractured the left. And the same old discourse on the rising far right keeps going. So how is this going to change? I have no idea.
Before I ask the next question.
Yes. What is that?
Oh, yes,
How
cabbage.
long has he got?
A salad.
Is this familiar to you?
No, not at all. Tell me.
So the story is the British Prime Minister Oliver, you'll be aware of, I'm sure, Liz Truss, didn't outlast a lettuce. She lasted 47 days, the lettuce a little longer. Okay. So my question to you is, how long will this man last?
Probably a month or two. You see, the problem also with French politics, why he can't succeed. We will have elections in 7 months in France. Macron called snap election. France can't have elections for another year, but now in June it's possible again. So obviously there's going to be another election. And everybody is watching what is going to happen, if they're going to lose their seats, if they would compromise now with François Bayrou, which is normal in a parliamentary regime. They might lose their seats in June. They are not going to they're losing them. So he has very little, but I think he will outlive that lettuce. You'll give us the news.
I love that. I love that image of the lettuce.
Let's see how long he goes. Well, to the other news of the week. The first Time magazine Man of the Year was 1927. It was awarded to American aviator Charles Lindbergh, who made the first non-stop flight from New York City to here in Paris. 33 hours it took him to fly, and it brought him global fame. Time staff say the idea was also an attempt to remedy the editorial embarrassment early that year because they didn't have him on their cover for the transatlantic flight. So, in the 97 years since, the Person of the Year is less of an accolade, more of the sign of the times, and acknowledges the person who is regarded to have most shaped the world, for better or worse, than the headlines over the year. So that includes Winston Churchill, Queen Elizabeth, Adolf Hitler, Ayatollah Khamenei, Charles de Gaulle, Elon Musk, Taylor Swift, and this year's announcement coming on Thursday. It was obvious, said the Times editorial team, and the national political correspondent. Well, this is what Eric Cortelosa had to say.
A very interesting thing happened ahead of the photo shoot. The photographer noticed that his right hand was raw and had some scarring on it, and he asked him what was that from, and he said it's from shaking so many hands. So that was a very illuminating moment that showed how Donald Trump has really been all over the country this year in an effort to win an election that nobody thought he could win. And, he's calmer than you would have expected. He has a level of equilibrium almost, walking around, cavorting with members of the club and other incoming cabinet officials, those who are jockeying for jobs in the administration. It's very much like a scene from King Arthur's court at Mar-a-Lago.
King Arthur's court. Oliver, in the brief time we have left, if not worthy, the right choice?
I suppose whatever one thinks of Donald Trump and his values and his political views, one has to admire him as a survivor. It's incredible how he is able to survive politically. But if I may suggest, I would recommend this year someone in the heart of Gaza who I would say stood up for our human values, the things that we talk as universal values, and that's Dr. Ahmed Yusuf, who at the beginning of the war, first of all, the last 15 years, he's run in Gaza the House of Wisdom, a space where people can think aloud, can think differently, can express their views, and have a space for that. But during the war, he went back into Gaza right at the beginning of the war. He was out for a conference, went back in, and for the past year has been feeding, living in a tent, feeding 1,000 people a day. Now, I think that, for me, in such horrific, horrendous circumstances, witnesses to the most wonderful human value that we should uphold. And I would have loved to have seen him as nominated as the Time magazine Man of the Year.
Oliver, a worthy thought, and great to close with that thought. Thank you to the correspondents and the panellists with me, to Oliver McTurnan in Istanbul, to Anna Navarro Pedro, thank you, Lila Jacinto. On the subject of Person of the Year, it is the 99th birthday of Mary Poppins and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang star Dick Van Dyke today. He is 99, he's still doing it strong, recently collaborating with Coldplay for the video of their released single this week, All My Love, written to pay a living tribute to the legend of Hollywood. Thank you for watching, keep moving. See you in 7 days for the World This Year special next week.
You got all my love. Is that it?
Well, it's in the right city.
You got all